I've soldered my step bezel onto my V-shaped ring shank, and I'm going to fill this area now with 0.5 fine silver. This hasn't been annealed yet, and I'm not going to anneal it till I cut it out. So what I'm going to do is just take paper, a little bit thicker paper would be nice. I don't have any at the moment, but this thin will do. So I'm just going to cut a piece of paper that fits the area perfectly, and then I'm going to use these measurements on my fine silver, and you can see that it's just a triangle shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my triangle shape, and then I'm going to put a pattern on it before I solder it on. Once I cut this out, anneal it, and put the pattern on, I'll probably have to anneal it again because putting the pattern on will work harden it. But once it's annealed a second time, I can easily bend it in shape, just push it around the ring, and then I'll solder it on. And if we do a good job of soldering it, then we're not going to have to clean any of the area where the pattern is. That's the idea. I've got my length. I'm just going to use my shears. They're straight shears, and make sure they're nice and sharp. We're just going to cut from the middle to the end. It'll just save some sewing. So you can see roughly that that's going to be what it looks like. We could have annealed the metal and bent it around the ring and marked it and cut it out, but then we would have had to straighten it out to stamp it. So this will do just fine. Cut both sides. I've put the metal on my charcoal block, and I'm just going to heat each one of these for about 5 seconds. And then we'll quench it and put our pattern on. To place your annealed metal on a steel block, polished, you can use a little punch to put dots in if you want. I have a border pattern that I'm going to put on. So just take your time, line it up quite nicely. Get the punch straight up and down. Hit it once firmly. Line it up. On the other side, do the same thing. So you can see it's just a simple little pattern, but it looks good, and it'll give it a little bit of detail. So I do the second one, and then we'll solder them on. I annealed the pieces again because you will have work hardened them by hammering the pattern in, and you'll notice that they're slightly distorted. So back on your steel block, gently flatten them out using your rawhide hammer. And then we'll form them around the ring. And basically it'll just be slipping this up under our step bezel and pushing the end down around the ring. Use your fingers, form this so that it's touching 100% on both sides, because once we set this up, we don't want to have to do anything other than solder it. And we'll put our solder bits on the side. Now we'll use easy solder to put these bits on the side. So you can see, looks Looks a little bit nicer than just the open pattern. Hold the ring in your third hand with your little detail plate balanced on the ring. Flex it both sides. Now I'm not going to wire this into place. I'm just going to place my little bits of solder on one side, solder it, make sure the other side is closed down against the metal, reposition it and solder the other side. So we're just doing one side at a time. So place your solder using your flux brush. And I'm using 4 bits of easy solder for this. And we want to heat this really slowly, because once again we want our solder to stay in place. Neutral flame. Take your time. You could use a heat gun for this or just put it under a heat lamp, but I'm too impatient. Make sure your solder is tucked up against the side of your metal. And what we really want is for this solder to flow without flowing up on top. So I'm going to concentrate most of my heat on the thicker ring underneath. You can see I'm just kind of brushing it. Now the flux has gone clear, and the solder should flow fairly quickly. There it goes, beautiful. And I've already put my solder on the other side, so I can just switch over. Lovely. So I'm going to quench this, have a look. If it's good, I'll turn it over and do the other side. Okay, I've got the second side up and I've got the last bits of solder. So once again, the majority of the heat on the larger metal. The flux has gone clear and the solder flowed. I am happy with that. So we'll quench it, pickle it, tidy it up, and we're ready to set the stone. You can see that the metal comes up underneath our stone, and since the stone is translucent, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my burnisher and I'm going to tuck it underneath and gently push the metal so that it comes up, so that it's touching the underside of the bezel. Yeah, maybe not. I may end up having to trim that out so that it looks better. And if I do, I'll just thread my saw blade down through and I'll pierce it out. I'll have to see how I go. I'm going to anneal this again and see if I can push the metal over a little bit more. It's moving, but as usual, we just anneal, move the metal, anneal, move the metal until we get it how we want it. I pushed the metal so that it's up, follows the same curve as the bezel. I used a burr to burr the top down so it doesn't touch the stone. So now we're ready to pickle, tidy up the edges, and then set the stone. After you get this out of the pickle, check all of your solder joins. If they're good, sand everything back to 400 grade finish, polish it, and then we'll set the stone. So this was the original idea, just 3 rings with the big ring on top so that we could set different things in it. And this was the second idea, to fill in this gap and then use the step bezel on top. So this one is basically finished. I'm quite happy with that. So go to work.